We all pay taxes. It's one of those certainties in life, a slice of our earnings that goes into a big central pot to pay for the things we all rely on. We see it on our pay slips, we pay it at the checkout, and we know it's supposed to fund our hospitals, schools, roads, and keep our local communities running smoothly. But lately it feels like that simple deal isn't holding up its end of the bargain. More and more people are asking a very fair question. If we're all paying in, why does it feel like the system is stretched to breaking point? It's a conversation happening in homes and workplaces right across the UK, a growing frustration that something just isn't working as it should. This isn't just about the numbers on a tax bill, it's about the real-world impact we see every day. It's about waiting longer for a doctor's appointment, seeing local libraries or youth centres close, or reading headlines about entire city councils teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. We're told these services are vital, yet they seem to be in a constant state of crisis. This disconnect between the money going in and the services coming out is what's making people lose faith. The trust that our contributions are being managed effectively is wearing thin, and that's a dangerous place for any society to be. We need to understand why this is happening. The problem seems to be rooted in the very structure of how we collect and spend this money. The current system is highly centralized. Everything we pay gets sent to a central government or a local council who then decide where it goes. It's a bit like a black box. We put our money in one end and services are supposed to come out the other. But we have very little say or visibility over what happens in between. This distance between the taxpayer and the final service creates huge inefficiencies, a lack of accountability, and a system that feels completely removed from the people it's meant to serve. So, what if there was another way? What if we could redesign the system from the ground up to be more direct, more transparent, and to give ordinary people a real stake in how their money is used? This isn't just a fantasy, it's a serious proposal for a radical shift. Imagine a system where instead of just paying tax, you receive a direct share in the economy you help build. These shares would then be yours to spend directly on the public services you and your family need. It's a big idea, one that could revolutionize our relationship with public finance and put power back where it belongs, with the people. You don't have to look far to see the evidence that our current tax system is failing us. The headlines from the past couple of years paint a pretty stark picture of a model that is fragile and struggling to cope. Take Birmingham City Council, for example. In September 2023, the UK's largest local authority effectively declared bankruptcy. It was facing a colossal £760 million bill for equal pay claims, and had wasted £100 million on a flawed IT system. The result? Residents are now facing huge council tax hikes, while the services they rely on are being slashed. People in Birmingham are being asked to pay more for less, all because of mismanagement that happened miles away from their control. This wasn't an isolated incident. Just a couple of months later, in November 2023, Nottingham City Council followed suit. It waved the white flag, facing a £23 million hole in its budget. A huge part of this was down to the collapse of its publicly owned energy company, Robin Hood Energy, which lost a staggering £38 million. Again, taxpayers in Nottingham are the ones left to pick up the pieces, facing cuts to essential services because of decisions they had no say in. These council crises show that when a centralised authority makes mistakes, it's the ordinary people, the taxpayers, who bear the full cost without any protection or recourse. The problem extends far beyond local government. Look at the NHS, our most cherished public service. In the 2023 to 2024 financial year, it had a budget of over £152 billion. That's an almost unimaginable amount of money. Yet by mid-2024, there were 7.6 million people on hospital waiting lists in England. Where is all that money going? A significant portion is lost to layers of administrative bureaucracy, complex management structures, and inefficient contracts. It's a system where vast sums are absorbed by the machinery of the organisation itself, long before they ever reach a doctor, a nurse, or a patient in need of care. And then there are the high-profile government projects that seem to swallow public money with little to show for it. The Rwanda deportation scheme is a prime example. By 2024, the government had already spent £240 million on a policy that had yet to deport a single person. That's nearly £250 million that could have been spent on schools, hospitals, or fixing potholes, diverted to a scheme with no tangible results. These examples aren't just unfortunate mistakes, they are symptoms of a deep-seated systemic flaw. They show that a centralized system lacks the accountability and efficiency needed to manage public funds responsibly. Given the deep fractures in the current model, it's clear we need more than just small tweaks and temporary fixes. We need to think bigger and bolder. The proposal on the table is a fundamental reinvention of public finance, a move away from traditional taxation towards what we can call a share-based economy. The core idea is simple but powerful. Instead of the government taking a portion of your income before you even see it, you would receive shares in the businesses you contribute to. These shares would represent your economic contribution and would become your property, a tangible asset in your hands. So, how would this work in practice? Every time you work, whether you're an employee in a large company, a self-employed plumber, or a small business owner, a portion of the value you create would be issued to you as shares. These wouldn't be shares in just one company, but in a diversified portfolio representing the wider productive economy. Think of it as gaining a direct stake in the nation's economic success. Your wealth would be directly tied to the health of the businesses you and your fellow citizens support and contribute to every single day. It's about transforming taxpayers from passive contributors into active shareholders. This new system would see these shares replace the taxes we currently pay, like income tax, national insurance, corporation tax, and VAT. Instead of money being funneled into a vast anonymous government pot, you would hold these shares in a secure digital account. They would have a real tradable value, almost like a new form of currency. When you needed to pay for a public service, be it a school place for your child, a visit to the GP, or your contribution to local road maintenance, you would do so by transferring some of your shares directly to the service provider. The goal here is to create a direct link between your economic contribution and the services you receive. It cuts out the middleman, the layers of government bureaucracy that currently absorb so much of our tax money. By decentralizing the system, we empower individuals. You are no longer just a taxpayer, subject to the decisions of distant officials. You become a direct economic actor, a shareholder with the power to choose and fund the services that matter most to you. This fundamentally changes the relationship between the citizen and the state, fostering a sense of ownership and direct responsibility. Let's break down exactly how this share-based system might look on a day-to-day basis, moving from the abstract idea to a practical reality. Imagine you work for a company. Under the current system, your employer deducts tax and national insurance from your salary, and the company itself pays corporation tax on its profits. In the new share-based economy, this would all change. Instead of these deductions, a proportion of the company's value generated by your work would be allocated to you in the form of shares. These shares would be deposited into your personal secure digital wallet. Much like your salary is deposited into your bank account today, these shares wouldn't just be for employees. The system would be designed to include everyone who contributes to the economy. If you are self-employed, a portion of your declared earnings would be converted into shares. If you run a small business, the value it generates would also result in a share allocation for you and your employees. The key principle is that economic contribution, in whatever form it takes, is rewarded with a direct stake in the economy. This creates a fairer system where everyone, from a barista to a boardroom executive, builds personal wealth through their participation in the nation's productivity. Now, you have these shares in your digital wallet. What do you do with them? These shares become the currency for public services. Let's say your local council needs funding for bin collections, street lighting, and park maintenance. It would calculate the cost, and let residents know how many shares are needed from each household to cover these services. You would then log into your secure account and transfer the required number of shares directly to the council's public service wallet. The transaction would be instant, transparent, and recorded on a secure digital ledger, so you could see exactly where your contribution has gone. The same principle would apply to other major services. The NHS, for instance, would be funded by citizens transferring shares to cover their healthcare contributions. This could be a standard annual amount for universal access, with additional share payments for specific treatments, all managed through your digital wallet. Schools would receive shares from the parents of the children who attend, giving parents direct financial leverage and a clearer say in their child's education. This direct payment model ensures that funding follows the individual, making service providers directly accountable to the people they serve, not to a distant government department. To really get our heads around the difference this new system would make, let's use a very simple, everyday example: buying a pint of beer at the pub. Right now, when you pay, say, £5 for that pint, you're not just paying the pub. A whole host of invisible hands are already taking a sip before you do. First, there's the VAT, a 20% chunk that goes straight to the government. Then there's the beer duty, another tax paid by the brewer. The pub owner has to pay business rates, and their employees have paid income tax and national insurance on their wages. The brewer also paid corporation tax on their profits. By the time you get your drink, a significant portion of its cost has been siphoned off into the tax system. This complex web of taxes is inefficient and lacks any kind of transparency. The money all flows into one giant opaque pot in Whitehall, where it's mixed together and spent on everything from motorways to foreign aid. You, the pint drinker, have absolutely no idea what your specific contribution is funding. You can't track it, and you certainly can't choose where it goes. It's a system built on blind faith, where we hand over our money and just hope for the best. The recent failures of councils and government departments show that this hope is often misplaced, with our money being lost to waste and mismanagement along the way. Now, let's imagine buying that same pint in our new share-based economy. The picture looks very different. The price of the pint would be much lower because all those embedded taxes, VAT, corporation tax, beer duty, would no longer exist. You would pay the pub directly for the product and the service. The pub, the brewer, and their employees would all receive shares based on the value they've created through this transaction. So instead of money being taken away, economic value in the form of shares is being created and distributed among the people who made it happen. The economic activity itself generates the wealth. In this new model, you keep the value you've created. Later, when you need to fund your local services, you make a conscious and direct payment using the shares you've accumulated. You're not paying a hidden tax on a pint of beer to fund a distant, unknown project. Instead, you are taking the shares you earned from your work and your economic activity and deciding to transfer them to your local hospital or your child's school. The transaction is clear, direct, and purposeful. You see exactly what you are paying for, and the service provider gets the funding without it being diluted by a complex and inefficient bureaucracy. It's a much cleaner, more honest exchange. One of the most powerful benefits of a share-based system is the radical transparency it would introduce into public finance. Right now, the journey our tax money takes is shrouded in mystery. It travels through countless government departments, agencies, and local authorities, with costs and overheads being skimmed off at every stage. It is almost impossible for an ordinary citizen to track their individual contribution and see how it was spent. This lack of clarity is what allows inefficiency and waste to thrive, hidden from public view. A share-based economy would tear down this veil of secrecy for good. Imagine a system built on a secure public digital ledger, something like the blockchain technology that powers cryptocurrencies. Every single transaction would be recorded, time-stamped, and visible to everyone. When you transfer your shares to the NHS, you would receive a digital receipt, and you could see that your contribution has landed directly in the NHS's funding wallet. The NHS, in turn, would have to show how it spends those shares on staff salaries, medical equipment, or building maintenance. This creates an unbroken, auditable trail from the citizen to the final service, making it incredibly difficult to waste or misdirect funds. This transparency naturally leads to greater accountability. When service providers, be they hospitals, schools, or councils, are funded directly by the citizens they serve, the power dynamic shifts dramatically. If a school's performance is slipping or a hospital's waiting lists are growing, parents and patients have immediate financial leverage. They are no longer just passive recipients of a state-provided service. They are shareholders who are paying for a service. They can demand better performance, greater efficiency, and a higher standard of care, because they are the ones directly providing the funds. This would force public services to become more responsive and customer-focused. This direct control also empowers communities to make decisions that are right for them. A centralized, one-size-fits-all approach from Westminster rarely works for everyone. The needs of a rural community in Cumbria are very different from those of an inner-city borough in London. Under a share-based model, local people would have the power to direct their collective shares towards the priorities that matter most to them. They could choose to invest more in public transport, youth services, or environmental projects. It fosters a sense of local ownership and allows communities to shape their own future rather than having it dictated to them by a distant government. Making such a seismic shift from a centuries-old tax system to a new share-based economy wouldn't happen overnight. It would require a carefully planned transition, underpinned by new laws, new technology, and a clear timeline. The first step would be to pass a landmark piece of legislation, which we could call the Public Finance Decentralization Act. This act would do two crucial things. It would formally abolish the major taxes we know today, such as income tax and VAT, and it would establish the new economic shares as a form of legal tender specifically for paying for public services. The Act would need to set out a clear schedule, perhaps an 18-month window, to value and create the initial framework for these shares. Alongside this, a second law would be needed, the People's Economic Assembly Act. This would create a new democratic body to oversee the entire system. This assembly wouldn't be made up of politicians, but of representatives from all corners of the economy, businesses, employees, and the self-employed. Its job would be to ensure the share allocation is fair and equitable, to prevent any single group from gaining too much power, and to act as a regulator and mediator for the new social contract. It would be mandated to publish transparent annual reports, holding the entire system to account. This oversight is crucial to maintain public trust and ensure the system works for everyone. Of course, this all depends on having the right technology in place. The backbone of the system would be a secure, user-friendly digital platform where every citizen could manage their share wallet. This would need to be as simple and intuitive to use as a modern online banking app. We could look to countries like Estonia, a world leader in e-governance, for inspiration. A major government initiative, backed by a significant investment of around £500 million, would be needed to develop this platform. The goal would be to have a working prototype ready for testing within 3 years, ensuring it is robust, secure, and accessible to all. The rollout would need to be gradual. A pilot scheme could be launched in a specific region, like Greater Manchester, by 2027. This would allow us to test the system in a real-world environment, identify any challenges, and refine the process before a national rollout. We could learn from the pilot, gather feedback from citizens and service providers, and make necessary adjustments. Based on the success of the pilot, a full national transition could be planned for the early 2030s. This methodical, step-by-step approach would ensure a smooth and successful transformation, building public confidence at every stage. In a decentralized, share-based economy, the role of central government would undergo a profound transformation. It would move away from being the primary collector and spender of public money and evolve into a regulator, a guarantor, and a steward of the new system. The government would no longer be responsible for managing a multi-trillion-pound budget and making top-down decisions about how every penny is spent. Instead, its main function would be to ensure the new marketplace for public services is fair, efficient, and accessible to all citizens, regardless of their wealth or background. One of government's key new responsibilities would be to act as a safety net. What happens if someone doesn't have enough shares to pay for essential healthcare or education, perhaps due to illness, unemployment, or disability? This is where the state would step in. It would manage a central social security fund, financed by a small automatic levy on all share transactions. This fund would be used to top up the share wallets of the most vulnerable, ensuring that everyone has the means to access core public services. This guarantees that a share-based system doesn't leave anyone behind and upholds the principle of a universal right to essentials like healthcare and education. The government would also take on the crucial role of quality control and regulation. It would set the national standards that all public service providers, whether they are hospitals, schools, or transport operators, must meet. It would be responsible for inspections, for ensuring qualifications are up to scratch, and for intervening if a provider is failing to deliver. Think of it as being the referee, not the player. It sets the rules of the game and ensures everyone plays by them, but it doesn't control every pass of the ball. This allows for innovation and competition among providers while guaranteeing a minimum standard of quality for all citizens. Finally, the government would retain responsibility for matters of national significance that cannot be easily funded by individual share transactions. This includes things like national defense, foreign policy, and major infrastructure projects like high-speed rail networks or new energy grids. These would be funded by the National Social Security Fund or through specific national share levies agreed upon by the People's Economic Assembly. The government's role, therefore, becomes more focused and strategic. It steps back from the day-to-day running of public services and concentrates on setting the framework, protecting the vulnerable, and managing the big-picture issues that affect the entire nation. The system we have for funding our country is broken. It is a relic of a different era, a centralized machine that has become too complex, too inefficient, and too distant from the people it is supposed to serve. The recurring crises in our councils, the endless waiting lists in our NHS, and the scandalous waste on failed government projects are not isolated incidents. They are the predictable outcomes of a system that lacks transparency and accountability. We are all paying into this system, but we have lost control. It is time to seriously consider a fundamental alternative that puts power back into our hands. A share-based economy offers a compelling vision for a different future. By replacing traditional taxes with a system where every citizen earns a direct stake in the economy, we create a more direct and honest relationship between our contributions and our public services. This is not about abolishing the support we give each other. It is about making that support smarter, more efficient, and more democratic. It is about transforming ourselves from passive taxpayers into active shareholders, with a real say over how our collective wealth is managed and deployed for the common good. The benefits are clear. A decentralized system built on a transparent digital platform would slash the bureaucratic waste that currently consumes so much of our public money. It would make service providers directly accountable to the communities they serve, forcing them to be more responsive and efficient. It would give individuals and local communities the power to set their own priorities, fostering a sense of ownership and civic pride. Most importantly, it would ensure that when things go wrong, the responsibility doesn't just fall on the shoulders of ordinary people through higher taxes and poorer services. This is undoubtedly a big idea, and it would require a significant shift in how we think about the state and our role within it. But the scale of the challenge should not deter us from exploring it. The current path is leading to a steady decline in the public services we all cherish and a growing sense of disillusionment. By embracing a share-based, decentralized model, we have the opportunity to build a more resilient, transparent, and equitable society. A society where everyone has a tangible stake, a clearer voice, and a fairer share in the future we are all building together.